queens who have lived a life of violence, either by someone else's hand or their own, but one thing for certain with these royals is that there is a sense of surprise to each one. Maybe some brutal surprises. Like my girl, Isabella of France, who was married off to England's Edward II when she was just 12 years old, because you know, it was gross and normal to marry at that age. And her relationship with the English monarch would end over their opposing politics and break down in trust in each other. Edward was known to keep male favorites close to him, often as advisors, and he immediately began to push Isabella out of the king's sphere of influence. Edward began to favor his advisor over Isabella to the point where the two were rarely ever together at all. Maybe they were roommates. I don't know, I don't judge. Eventually, Edward faced conflict with Charles IV of France and Isabella's brother. Isabella's lands were confiscated and she was left for France. By that point, Isabella was ready to return to England once more, but she really wanted to kick her husband's boyfriend out. I mean, boy as in friend, not boyfriend. I mean, I don't know, what do you guys think? Of course, her husband refused, though, which turns out to be a big mistake. Almost immediately, Edward's support crumbled and he abdicated the throne, and Isabella had his advisor executed. Yeah, that was pretty unfair for her to do that, right? Well, she updated England's software with her sons Edward III installed as the new king, and Isabella and her new lover, ran England. Then Edward III launched his own coup against his once beloved mom, and Isabella was forced to give up her income, assets, and most of her land, which, what the heck, Edward? Isabella should have done what the Empress Julia Agrippina of Rome did, which was the opposite. Just regularly tried to overthrow her own son. Agrippina the Younger was an ambitious person, even as far as Roman rulers go. She was once the first empress of Rome, although she spent much of her early life trying to depose her predecessors. She truly believed she and her son had the birthright claim to the empire, and manipulated her uncle Claudius into changing Roman laws about familial marriage so that she and the two could wed. Meaning, wait a minute, am I reading that correctly? She tried to marry her own son? Well, y'all don't do this. Anyways, Claudius' demise has been surrounded of mystery, as some sources claimed Agrippina killed him, together with her son Nero. Oh, Nero. Okay, yeah, this actually makes a lot of sense now. She then ruled Rome from 49 to 54 CE. Eventually, Nero grew tired of his manipulative mother and forced her out of power, and she attempted to organize a political opponent against her son, and of course he had her expelled. But the difference between her and Irene of Athens, who ruled between 797 to 802 of CE, although she did co-rule with her son for 2 decades, she knew her son was an unpopular emperor, and just like so many celebrities who we can't stand today, the Empress was an ambitious woman and wanted full control of the Byzantine Empire. With the help of some political allies, Irene led a conspiracy against her own son, but despite the conflict, they went to a family therapy session and found a good counselor who told them to just stop it. And ultimately, the mother and son reconciled. However, that wasn't the end. In 786, the public turned against Constantine after he decided to divorce his wife and marry his mistress, like the average worker man in the office who hits on his secretary in the 80s. Irene took advantage of this and once again conspired against her son, and man, she really hated him. Anyway, she ordered the rest of Constantine and gouged his eyes out. Yeah, because that escalated quicker than I thought, and I guess blood isn't thicker than water. Speaking of relatives that don't care about you, as the queen with no heart, the queen mother Catherine de' Medici had a rebellious daughter named Margaret who dared to cross her and Catherine and took her revenge for this. Catherine would fight over her married daughter's adultery and affairs, and it is said that Catherine's scream could be heard echoing throughout the palace. During one instance, when the queen mother found out about her daughter's new romantic interest, she locked her up in the castle and never saw her again. She also ordered her daughter's romantic interest to be executed in front of her daughter. I mean, I'm no psychologist, but also considering the fact that her husband also cheated with her with her mistress and asked on his deathbed to see his mistress and not his wife, and then also seeing how happy her daughter was with a man that treated her good, I don't know, it just feels like she was projecting. Like, God, mom, why can't you just be happy for me? Speaking of mothers who aren't happy, Egypt becomes a divided country at war with heinous, a Greek word for foreign invaders, as from the area we now call as Palestine. Coming to the throne in 1478 BC, she is thought to be one of the most successful pharaohs. Hatshepsut of Dynasty 18 ruled and maintained a power to her young nephew, only to have her legacy as female king to word queen connoting a mere helpmate, not a ruler. Ripped away from her 20-some years after her death, when her names and images were erased and smashed and all of her greatest achievements relabeled for her father and brother instead. But as a note, as a region, Hatshepsut did get a taste of power, and it seemed she wanted more. Hatshepsut decided that she wanted to rule as king herself, not just behind the scenes in the name of somebody else, but at some point she decided that she would rule alongside her stepson as an equal, or even as a superior. Either way, she wanted the title of pharaoh for herself. Unfortunately, she didn't. Like Bloody Mary, as she is noted, is actually acclaimed as a heroic underdog that became a monarch that was even more mythologized and violent, despite her no bolder than her father, King Henry VIII. Being the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, she was turned from princess to lady and was separated from her mother when her father left her for Anne Boleyn, which she absolutely hated. When Mary was able to ascend to the throne, it was given to her by her 5-year reign, when Mary then navigated challenges as her status as the first English queen. She, like Elizabeth, was the I, who would reign after her and wanted to focus on wearing the crown to rule rather than be the wife of a king. She prioritizes religion above all else, implementing reforms and restrictions aimed at restoring the Catholic Church in England, because that's what the Catholic Church does all the time. Most controversially, she ordered 280 Protestants burned at the stake as heretics, a fact that would later cement her as a reputation as Bloody Mary. They are where we get the image of the monarch who was raging in madness and open tyranny. She was stubborn, inflexible, and undoubtedly flawed, but she was also the product of her time, as incomprehensible to modern minds as our world would be as to hers. But like all older sisters, she did pave the way to help her younger sister, as Elizabeth I would then rule and also be noted as the most powerful ruler England would ever see. Her story might be one of ambition and regicide, or of a woman manipulated by an evil puppet master. I don't know, what do you think? But it might be both. Her husband was the pharaoh Seti II, and Seti II was another queen, but also apparently she was too old, and so Twosret became the second wife. Seti became the pharaoh when he was very old because his father was refused to die, just like Queen Elizabeth until now, and only carried on until Seti was quite elderly, and when he finally became pharaoh, somehow she ended up standing as regent. Are you getting it so far? I don't know. Essentially, for the next king, who is the young boy named Septa, who had no relation to her at all, a chancellor named Bey tries to puppet Twosret and use her as a royal female. But before Septa dies, just a few years later from a health issue due to inbreeding, he gets rid of the chancellor and Twosret is placed there as his regent. The question of whether or not she killed the king herself or used the king herself as a puppet to get rid of Bey is still unknown, but either way, Twosret still takes the reins of Egypt into her hands and names herself as not queen, but king. She declares herself as pharaoh and starts putting her name in pharaohs and monuments, and because Egypt doesn't like removing pharaohs from power, they would just tolerate this because, you know, chaos from a pharaoh is pretty normal. But with this belief and accusing Twosret of getting rid of the last pharaoh puts a lot of tension in the land, and she then deals with a contender who challenges to overthrow her, and eventually she is overthrown. By any other record of her, she is suddenly gone, until other researchers found her. She had once ruled Madagascar, and no doubt she was as fierce as she would have done anything for her kingdom. Queen Ranavalna I was the first ruled after her king, her husband, Ramda, had died. During her reign, she got her uncle executed to protect her power, and some records state that she ended her mother's life by subjecting her to extreme hunger for some reason. During her 33 reign as queen, she isolated the island and ceased much of its trade and goodwill exchanges with African people to the west. Also, she had critics as she'd forced them to eat with poisoned chicken skin and vomit it back up, and if they survived, they would ingest and regurgitate it to prove that they were loyal to her. If they died, it proved that they were secretly disloyal somehow. And their deaths were warranted. During Ranavalna's reign, the population of Madagascar was cut in half, as it took the island nation decades to recover of what was lost during her rule. Like Empress Wu's rise to power was achieved through cruel and calculating tactics, a popular conspiracy theory stated that she killed her own baby girl and blamed it on the Gaozong Empress so that the Empress could be demoted. Even so driven with power that when her eldest son, the Crown Prince, began to assert his authority and advocate policies, he suddenly died in 675, and many suspected he was poisoned by his own mom. There's a lot of mothers like this, I don't know why. His next heir kept a low profile, or tried to, but then Empress Wu accused him of plotting a rebellion that was later on banished. Eventually, a palace coup took place and forced Empress Wu to yield her position, and to the next day, her son Xiaozong was restored to power and the Tang dynasty was formally restored. Still, considering the golden era, the Tang dynasty thrived as a high point in Chinese civilization with a golden age of cosmopolitan culture. And with the trades and the land trades along the Silk Roads, maritime trades by the sea, the Tangs were able to acquire and gain many technologies, cultural practices, and rare luxury items, you know, just like in Mario Kart. And it was all thanks to the decision of getting rid of one power-obsessed empress. And finally, like all brutal queen leaders, how can we forget about the one and only Hispania monarch, Queen Isabella, who co-ruled Spain with King Ferdinand II from 1451 to 1504, and with her reign was marked by oppression. The notorious queen had the Spanish Inquisition began during her rule, as she was the instrumental in the efforts to expel Spanish Jews and Muslims from the kingdom. In 1492, the same year as she sponsored Columbus' fateful journey, she also decreed that all Jewish citizens either convert to Catholicism or be banished from the country. Jews from around the country were then brought to Spanish court to either pledge their faith to the Catholic Church or be expelled on the spot. As for Columbus, he soon discovered that the New World and immediately started slaying and enslaving people under Isabella's name. His expedition to the New World directly led to the eradications of the Arawak people and the ends of millions of other native peoples, a dark legacy that both follows him and Isabella to this day. Well, that's it for this list. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. My name is Jess, and I wish you all the best.